Tara sat in the driveway of her beautiful home, watching the water blur the world outside. To anyone passing by, she looked like a woman who had everything, a successful and loving husband, and a house that looked like a museum. But as she sat there, she felt a strange heaviness in her chest. She realized she had forgotten her phone charger. It was a small, silly thing to go back for, but it was the reason her entire world was about to end. As she pushed open the heavy oak front door, she didn't hear the usual silence of an empty house. She heard something else. It was a faint sound coming from upstairs, the sound of someone moaning. Tara kicked off her heels. She walked toward the stairs, her bare feet making no sound on the cold marble. She heard a laugh and she knew it instantly. It was her best friend, Elena. Then, she heard a man's voice. It was Mark, her husband. She stood outside the bedroom door, her hand frozen in the air. She heard Mark tell Elena that she was the only one who truly understood him. She heard him say that Tara was too simple, too quiet, and that she lived in a world of shadows while Elena was the sun. Tara felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She heard the sound of them laughing and moaning together. She heard Mark promise Elena that soon, they wouldn't have to hide anymore. He told her that he was just waiting for the right moment to leave Tara, but that for now, he needed Tara's family connections to finish his latest business deal. Tara backed away from the door. She turned and ran. As she drove away, she heard the wind howling against the windows, a lonely, screaming sound. Her vision was blurred by the rain on the glass. She reached for her phone with trembling fingers and dialed a number she had memorized but never used. It was a number given to her at a party months ago by Nikolai Volkov. When the call connected, she didn't speak first. She heard the deep, steady breathing of a man on the other end. It was a calm, grounded sound. Then, she heard Nikolai Volkov speak. His voice was like low thunder, dark, powerful, and strangely calm. He asked her why she was calling him at such an hour. Tara gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. She didn't tell him anything, just asked him if they could meet. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, she heard Nikolai tell her a location. He didn't ask questions. Instead, she heard him say that he would be there in 20 minutes. He told her to drive carefully. Tara ended the call. The silence in the car was different now. It was no longer the silence of a victim. It was the silence of a woman who was about to change the rules of the game. The drive to the meeting spot was a blur of neon lights and dark puddles. Tara drove to a quiet pier at the edge of the city, a place where the sound of the ocean swallowed the sound of the rain. She parked her car and waited. She heard the rhythmic sound of the waves against the wooden pilings. Then, she heard it. The low, powerful growl of a heavy engine. A black sedan pulled up beside her car. The headlights cut through the dark like two cold eyes. She heard the heavy thud of a car door closing. Then, she heard footsteps on the wet ground. Nikolai Volkov didn't rush. He walked like a man who owned the night. Tara rolled down her window just a little bit. She heard the wind whistle through the gap. It brought the smell of salt and rain. Nikolai stood there, his tall body blocking out the moon. He didn't look like a man who had been asleep. He looked like a man who was always watching. He asked her to get into his car. His voice was a deep rumble that she felt in her chest. Tara stepped out of her car, her wet clothes feeling heavy and cold. She sat in the passenger seat of his sedan. The moment the door closed, she heard the world go quiet. The car was like a safe, warm, still, and smelling of leather. "You didn't tell me who she was on the phone," she heard Nikolai say. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the dark waves. Tara squeezed her hands together. She told him that she couldn't say the name out loud yet. She said she was afraid that if she spoke it, the lie would become real. She heard her own voice shake, and it made her feel weak. Then, she heard the soft sound of paper sliding against wood. Nikolai reached into a small space in the door and pulled out a thin envelope. He dropped it on the dashboard. "It matters to me, Tara," she heard him say. She opened the envelope. Her fingers were trembling. Inside were pictures. They were a bit blurry, taken from far away. In the first one, she saw Mark. In the second one, she saw the woman. She heard a small, sharp gasp come from her own throat. It was Elena. Her best friend. The person she had shared every secret with since they were children. Tara heard her heart start to beat like a drum against her ribs. It was a fast, scared sound. She asked him how he had these. I wasn't following Mark, Tara, she heard Nikolai say. His voice was cold, like ice. I was following my wife. This was the moment Tara understood who Nikolai Volkov really was. He wasn't just a rich man from the neighborhood. He was a man who knew everything. He told her that he had known about the affair for 3 weeks. He heard her silence and kept talking. He said he had been waiting. He told her that he didn't tell her sooner because he wanted to see if she would see it herself. He said that in his world, you have to be able to see the truth even when it hurts. I heard you on the phone tonight, Nikolai said. He finally turned to look at her. His eyes were dark and hard. I heard a woman who is tired of being lied to. I heard a woman who is ready to fight back. Tara heard the rain getting louder on the roof of the car. She realized that Nikolai didn't need her to explain anything. He had heard the same lies from Elena that she had heard from Mark. They were both standing in the ruins of their lives. He asked her if she wanted to make them pay. He didn't ask if she wanted to cry. He asked if she wanted to take away everything they loved. Tara heard her own breathing get slow and deep. She looked at the pictures of her best friend and her husband. She felt the last bit of her kindness turn into stone. She told him that she wanted them to feel as empty as she did. She heard Nikolai move in his seat. He told her they would start a plan. He said they would pretend to be together. He said they would make the world believe that while Mark and Elena were sneaking around, she and Nikolai were the ones truly in control. They think they are the smart ones, she heard him whisper. He leaned closer. She could hear the steady tick of his expensive watch. They don't know that we are already 10 steps ahead of them. As Nikolai started the car, Tara heard the power of the engine. She wasn't just a sad wife anymore. She was a partner to a man who lived in the shadows. And together, they were going to burn the old world down. Tara realized something as she walked back through the tall glass doors of the mansion. This was Nikolai's home, but it was also Elena's. She heard the sound of a piano playing in a room far away. It was a sad, slow song. It was the sound of a woman who was bored, a woman who thought she was still the queen of the house. She heard Nikolai's voice behind her. He told her not to worry. He said that this house had 40 rooms, and he and Elena hadn't shared a word or a bed in years. He told her that Elena lived in the West Wing, a place filled with bright lights and loud music. He lived in the East Wing, where the shadows were long and the air was quiet. We live under the same roof, she heard Nikolai say, his voice echoing in the marble hall. But we live in different worlds. She hears the sound of her own lies. I hear the sound of the truth waiting to come out. Tara heard a door open at the top of the grand staircase. She heard the sharp noise of high heels on the wood. She looked up and saw Elena. Her best friend looked perfect, as always. She was wearing a silk robe that flowed behind her like a cloud. She heard Elena call out to Nikolai. Her voice was sweet, but it sounded fake, like a bell that was cracked. Elena asked him who the guest was. She said she didn't know they were having company. Tara heard Nikolai's footsteps as he walked to her side. He didn't look up at his wife. He looked only at Tara. He spoke loudly, his voice filling the entire hallway. He told Elena that Tara was his guest, and that she would be staying as long as she liked. He said that Tara had lost her way in the storm, and he was the one who had found her. She heard Elena let out a short, nervous laugh. Elena walked down a few steps. She heard her friend's voice change. It became sharp. Elena asked Tara if Mark knew where she was. She said that Mark had been calling her all morning, acting crazy, because his wife was missing. Tara felt her heart go cold. She heard the lie in Elena's voice. She knew that Elena wasn't worried about Mark, she was worried about herself. I heard Mark's voice enough yesterday, Tara said. Her own voice sounded steady in the big room. She heard Nikolai move closer to her. He told Elena that the West Wing was waiting for her. He said that he and Tara had business to discuss, business that didn't involve her. As Elena turned and walked away, Tara heard the sound of her friend's heels getting faster. It was the sound of someone who was starting to feel afraid. Nikolai led Tara into his private study. He shut the heavy door, and she heard the lock click into place. It was a solid, final sound. She will try to call Mark the moment she is alone, she heard Nikolai say. He sat down at his desk and opened a drawer. And I want her to. I want them to talk. I want them to whisper to each other about what is happening. He pulled out a small black device. He pressed a button, and Tara heard a low, static sound. Then, she heard a voice. It was Mark. He was on the phone, and he sounded panicked. She's with Volkov, Elena. Do you understand? If he finds out about us, he'll kill me. She heard Mark scream through the speakers. Tara sat in the leather chair. She heard the sound of her husband's fear, and for the first time, she didn't feel sad. She heard the sound of a trap closing. Nikolai looked at her. He asked her if she was ready for the next part. He said that tonight, there was a dinner party. He said they would walk in together, and they would let Mark and Elena watch them from across the room. We won't say anything, Nikolai whispered. She heard the rustle of his sleeves as he reached out to touch her hand. We will let the silence do the work for us. Tara heard the clock on the wall ticking. Each second was a step closer to the end of the people who had hurt her. She told him she was ready. She heard her own heart beat once, loud and strong. She was no longer just a friend or a wife. She was a ghost in their house, and she was going to make sure they never felt safe again. The night of the dinner party arrived with a cold, pale fog that crawled across the driveway. Tara sat in front of the mirror in the east wing. She heard the soft clink of the jewelry. Nikolai had given her heavy silver pieces that felt cold against her skin. She heard the rustle of her dress, a black silk that made a sound like a secret whispered in the dark. She heard Nikolai's footsteps outside her door. They were slow and heavy. He didn't knock, he simply spoke through the wood. He told her it was time to go. He said that tonight, they weren't just guests. They were the main event. They drove to the city. Tara heard the city come alive. She heard the distant sirens, but inside the car, it was silent. She heard Nikolai's steady breathing. He told her that when they entered the room, she should not look for Mark or Elena. He told her to keep her eyes on the horizon, as if she were looking at a world they couldn't see. When they arrived at the hotel, the sound hit her like a wave. She heard the roar of the crowd, hundreds of people talking, laughing, and clinking glasses. But as Nikolai stepped out of the car and reached for her hand, the noise near the entrance began to die down. Tara heard the cameras first. The sound of the shutters was fast and aggressive. She heard the reporters whispering her name. She heard them asking questions about where she had been and why she was with Volkov. Ignore the noise, she heard Nikolai whisper. His voice was right at her ear, a calm center in the storm. The only sound that matters is the one you make when you walk. They entered the ballroom. The room was a sea of gold and white lights. Tara heard the orchestra playing a slow waltz. Then, she heard it, a sound she would know anywhere. It was Mark's voice. He was laughing, but the laugh sounded thin and sharp, like he was trying too hard. She heard Mark stop talking. The silence spread out from where he stood like a ripple in a pond. Nikolai led her toward the center of the room. Tara heard the whispers following them. Look at her dress. Look at the way he holds her. Suddenly, she heard footsteps running toward them. They were uneven and hurried. Tara, she heard Mark shout. His voice was loud, and it sounded desperate. Tara stopped. She heard the crowd go perfectly still. She felt Nikolai's hand rubbing slightly on hers, a silent signal to stay calm. She turned slowly and saw Mark. He looked messy. His tie was crooked, and his face was red. Behind him, she heard the soft, careful footsteps of Elena. Elena didn't speak. Tara heard her friend's breath hitch, a small, terrified sound. Elena was looking at Nikolai with eyes full of fear. "What are you doing, Tara?" she heard Mark ask. His voice was shaking now. He stepped closer, and she heard the smell of whiskey on his breath before he even spoke again. "Come home. Right now. You're making a scene." Tara didn't look at his face. She heard Nikolai step forward, his tall frame casting a long shadow over Mark. "I heard a man shouting," Nikolai said. His voice was low, but it echoed off the high ceilings. "But I don't see a man who has any right to be heard." "Do you, Tara?" Tara looked at Mark. She heard the sound of her own heart, slow and steady. She told Mark that she was already home. She heard the gasp of the crowd when she said it. Mark reached out to grab her arm. Tara heard the air whistle as Nikolai moved. Before Mark could touch her, Nikolai's hand was there, blocking him. She heard the sound of Mark's wrist bones creaking under Nikolai's grip. It was a small, dry sound. "I wouldn't dare," she heard Nikolai growl. Mark backed away, stumbling. He looked at Elena, but Elena was looking at the floor. She heard Elena whisper Mark's name, a warning sound that came too late. "We are going to dinner now," she heard Nikolai tell the room. His voice was like a king's. "I hope the rest of you enjoy the music. It's the only thing worth listening to tonight." As they walked away, Tara heard Mark start to yell again, but his voice was drowned out by the orchestra. She heard the sound of people turning their backs on him. She heard the sound of Elena sobbing quietly in the corner. Tara leaned into Nikolai. She heard him tell her she did well. He said that the first strike was over, and the wound was deep. "Did you hear him?" Tara whispered. "I heard a man who is realizing he is already dead," Nikolai said. As they sat down at their table, Tara heard the silver clink of her glass. She felt a strange peace. The world was loud, but for the first time, she knew exactly which sounds to listen to. She was the one holding the baton now, and the song was just beginning. The morning after the party, the mansion was buried in a thick, white mist. Tara sat in the sunroom, watching the fog press against the glass. She heard the soft sound of a spoon against her teacup. It was a lonely, sharp sound. She was thinking about Mark's red face and the way his voice had cracked when he shouted her name at the party. Suddenly, she heard a sound that didn't belong in the east wing. It was the soft, rhythmic thump of a fist hitting wood. It wasn't a strong knock like Nikolai's. It was a small, nervous sound. Tara stood up. She walked to the door and opened it. She heard a sharp intake of breath. Elena was standing there. Her best friend looked perfect, but her eyes were searching Tara's face for any sign of suspicion. She heard the rustle of Elena's expensive dress as she stepped inside without being asked. "Tara, thank God," she heard Elena whisper. Her voice sounded sweet, like sugar, but Tara now knew there was poison underneath. "I've been so worried. Mark is a mess. He's crying, Tara. He says he doesn't know why you ran away. What was his mistake?" Tara didn't move. She heard the wind whistling through the hallway. She heard Elena's jewelry jingle a little, happy sound that felt like a slap in the face. Tara stepped back and sat down. She heard the door click shut, and the silence of the room felt like a wall between them. Elena started to talk fast. Tara heard the words tumbling out. Elena said that Nikolai was dangerous. She heard Elena say that people were talking about Tara's reputation. She told Tara that as her best friend, she had to save her. She heard Elena promise that if Tara came home, she would make sure Mark made everything right. "He misses you so much, Tara," she heard Elena say. Her voice was soft, trying to sound kind. He told me he can't even sleep in your bed because it smells like you. It breaks my heart to hear him so sad. Tara felt a cold knot in her stomach. She heard the lie. She knew exactly why Mark wasn't sleeping because he was with Elena. But she kept her face still. She heard herself speak in a small, shaky voice, playing the part of the confused wife. She asked Elena if she really thought Mark was sorry. I know he is, she heard Elena say. She heard the soft sound of Elena's hand hitting her own chest, pretending to be sincere. He's my best friend's husband. I only want you guys to be happy. Tara heard the lie. It sounded like dry leaves crushing under a boot. She didn't pull away when Elena reached out to touch her hand. She heard the silence of the room, and then, she heard the heavy, solid sound of a footstep in the hallway. Nikolai was standing in the doorway. He didn't say anything. He just watched. I heard a guest arrived, Nikolai said. His voice was a low, dark rumble. Tara heard Elena gasp. She heard her friend turn around, the silk of her dress rustling loudly. Elena told Nikolai that she was taking Tara home. She said that Tara didn't belong in a house filled with secrets and shadows. So, you want to go to Mark, Nikolai said, his eyes locking onto Tara's. Is that true, Tara? Do you want to go back to the man who misses you so much? Tara heard the challenge in his voice. She heard Elena waiting, her breath held tight. No, Tara said. Her voice was simple and clear. I think I'll stay here a little longer. I like it here. She heard Elena let out a sharp, angry breath. It was the first time the sweet mask slipped. She heard the sound of Elena's heels clicking rapidly as she turned and walked out of the room. She heard the door slam shut with a loud, violent bang. Nikolai walked over to the window. He asked Tara if she heard it, the sound of the lie failing. She thinks I'm a fool, Tara whispered. She heard the sound of the fog outside, a quiet, muffled world. She thinks I'm still the same girl who believes everything she says. Let her think that, she heard Nikolai say. He told her that as long as Elena thought they were in the dark, she would keep making mistakes. He said that soon, they would hear the sound of the whole house of cards falling down. The afternoon sun was trapped behind the heavy gray clouds, making the east wing feel like it was under deep water. Tara sat in the corner of Nikolai's study. The room was filled with the smell of old paper and the cold scent of the rain still clinging to the window panes. She heard the soft hum of the electronic equipment on Nikolai's desk. She heard Nikolai's voice as he sat down in his large leather chair. He didn't look at her, he looked at the black phone sitting on the desk. He told her that Mark had been calling all morning. He said that Mark wasn't calling to ask if she was okay. He was calling to deal. Stay very quiet, Tara, she heard Nikolai whisper. The sound of his voice was like a low vibration in the quiet room. I want you to hear exactly what your life is worth to him. He pressed a button phone and turned speaker on. Tara heard the sharp beep of the line connecting. Then, she heard the sound of a man breathing fast. It was Mark. He sounded like he had been running. Volkov? Are you there? She heard Mark ask. His voice was shaky and thin. It was a weak sound, like paper tearing. I'm here, Mark, she heard Nikolai respond. His voice was a contrast, heavy, steady, and bored. You've called me 6 times. I hope you have something interesting to say. Look, let's be adults about this, she heard Mark say. Tara felt a cold shiver run down her back. She heard the fake businessman tone he always used when he was trying to hide a mistake. Tara is. She's emotional. She's confused. She thinks she needs a break. But she belongs to me. I know you're using her to get to my business shares. Is that what you think? She heard Nikolai ask. She heard the sound of him leaning back in his chair, the leather creaking softly. I know how this works, Mark continued. Tara heard the sound of him pouring a drink on the other end, the clink of glass and the splash of liquid. You want the Northport project. You want me to sign over the land rights. Fine. If I sign them over to you today, will you send her back? Will you tell her that you're done with her? Tara felt her breath hitch. She heard her husband offering to trade her for a piece of land. She heard him talking about her like she was a car or a house. She looked at Nikolai, and she heard the silence in the room get heavier. You're offering me the Northport project in exchange for your wife's return, she heard Nikolai ask. He spoke slowly, making sure every word was clear. She's my wife, Volkov. She's my property, Mark snapped. She heard the anger in his voice now, the sound of a man who was losing control. Just give her some story. Tell her you were just using her to get the land. She's simple enough to believe it. She'll come crawling back to me, and we can all move on. Tara heard the word simple again. It felt like a needle pricking her skin. She heard the sound of Nikolai's pen tapping against the desk. I heard your offer, Mark, she heard Nikolai say. His voice was so cold it felt like the temperature in the room had dropped. But I think you've made a mistake. You think Tara is something you can trade. I think she is something you've already lost. What is that supposed to? Mark started to say, but Nikolai pressed the button and cut him off. The silence that followed was absolute. Tara heard only the sound of her own heart, which was beating fast and hard. She heard the blood rushing in her ears. Did you hear him? She heard Nikolai ask. He finally turned to look at her. His eyes were like dark glass. I heard everything, Tara whispered. Her voice sounded different to her own ears. It wasn't the voice of a confused girl anymore. It was the voice of someone who had just seen the truth in the light. I heard him sell me. He didn't sell you, Tara, she heard Nikolai say. He stood up and walked over to her. She heard the soft sound of his hand brushing against her hair. He just told me how much he fears you. He thinks if he can buy you back, he can keep his secrets safe. He knows that as long as you are with me, his world is on fire. Tara heard the rain start to drum against the window again. She told him that she wanted to be the one to light the match. She heard Nikolai let out a small, dark sound of approval. We will let him wait, she heard him promise. We will let him think about the deal he tried to make. And while he waits, we will hear the sound of his investors leaving him one by one. Tara heard the clock on the wall ticking. Every tick felt like a victory. She wasn't a necessary burden or simple. She was the ghost that was going to haunt Mark until he had nothing left but the sound of his own lies. The next morning, the East Wing felt different. The air was still, but it wasn't the heavy silence of a house in mourning. It was the quiet of a hunter waiting for the wind to change. Tara sat in the library, a room filled with thousands of books she hadn't yet touched. She heard the soft sound of a printer in the corner, churning out pages of numbers and names. She heard Nikolai enter the room. He wasn't wearing his usual dark sweater. He was in a sharp, charcoal suit that made him look like a weapon made of stone. He held a tablet in his hand, and she heard the soft tap of his finger on the glass screen. I heard the news from the city, she heard him say, his voice a low, satisfied rumble. The banks have started to ask questions. They heard that the Northport project was being offered as a trade, and they didn't like the sound of it. Tara heard her heart skip a beat. She asked him what that meant for Mark. She heard the soft rustle of his suit jacket as he sat down across from her. It means he is bleeding, Nikolai said. And the sharks are starting to circle. I heard that 3 of his biggest investors pulled out this morning. They heard a rumor that he was desperate. In this city, desperation is a sound people run away from. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the sharp, angry ringing of a phone. It wasn't the office phone this time. It was Tara's personal phone, sitting on the small wooden table. She heard the vibration rattling against the wood, a frantic, buzzing sound. She looked at the screen. It was Mark. Don't answer, she heard Nikolai say. Just listen to it. Tara sat and watched the phone. She heard it ring until it went to voicemail. Then it rang again. And again. The sound was like a scream that wouldn't stop. Finally, after the 5th call, the phone went quiet. A moment later, she heard the ping of a text message. Then another. "Read them," Nikolai told her. Tara picked up the phone. She read them out loud. She heard Mark's voice in her head as she saw the words. "Tara, you have to stop this. Tell Volkov the deal is off. You're ruining everything. Answer me. I know you're sitting there reading. You're a traitor." But last message was different. It wasn't angry. It was terrified. "Tara, please. The bank is at the door. I can hear them, Tara. They're taking the house." Tara felt a cold wave of realization wash over her. She heard the sound of her own life being dismantled, but for the first time, she didn't feel like she was the one being broken. She heard the sound of the man who had called her simple, realizing he was the one who had been fooled. "I heard him cry once," Tara whispered, her eyes still on the screen. "When his father died, he made this same sound. A high, thin whimper. I thought it was grief back then. Now I know it's just the sound of him losing his safety." "The house is just the beginning," she heard Nikolai say. He stood up and walked to the window. "I heard that Elena is trying to move her money into a private account. She hears the crash coming, and she is trying to jump off the ship before it sinks." Tara heard the sound of the wind picking up outside, rattling the large library windows. She asked Nikolai what the final sound would be. "The sound of the truth," he said. He turned to face her. "I heard that the city's biggest charity gala is tomorrow night. Every person who ever looked down on you will be there. Every bank manager Mark ever lied to will be there. And most importantly, Mark and Elena will be there, trying to pretend they are still winning." Nikolai walked over to her. He reached out and she heard the soft click of his watch as he checked the time. "We are going to walk into that room," he told her. "And we aren't going to say a word about the money or the affair. We are just going to let them hear the sound of us being happy. It is the one sound they can't survive." Tara heard her own voice answer him. It sounded like steel. She told him she was ready to go. She heard the printer in the corner finish its job with a final, mechanical clack. The evidence was ready. The trap was set. And as the sun began to set over the mansion, Tara finally heard the sound she had been waiting for, the sound of the past finally going quiet. The morning of the gala was too quiet. The fog had cleared, leaving the east wing bathed in a sharp, cold sunlight. Tara was in the kitchen, a place she usually avoided. She heard the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of the wind in the trees outside. She was trying to make coffee, but her hands were shaking. She heard the silver spoon rattle against the marble counter, a tiny, frantic sound. She heard a footstep behind her. It wasn't the heavy, warning step Nikolai used in public. It was a softer sound, the sliding of socks on the wood floor. "You're breathing too fast," she heard Nikolai say. His voice wasn't a rumble this time, it was a low, warm murmur. Tara turned around. She heard the soft rustle of her cotton robe. Nikolai was standing there in a plain white t-shirt and gray lounge pants. He looked human. He didn't look like a shadow or a wolf. He looked like a man who had just woken up. "I heard the news again this morning," Tara whispered. She heard the water in the kettle start to hiss as it came to a boil. "Mark is calling everyone. He's telling them I've been kidnapped. He's trying to make me sound like a victim again." Nikolai walked closer. Tara heard the silence of the room change. It didn't feel empty anymore, it felt full. He reached out, and she heard the soft clink of his metal watch band as he took the spoon from her hand. "I heard what he said," Nikolai told her. He set the spoon down on the counter with a quiet tap. "But I also hear the way your heart is beating right now. It isn't the sound of a victim, Tara. It's the sound of a woman who is afraid of being happy. That is a much more dangerous thing." He didn't pull his hand away. Tara heard the sound of her own breath hitch. She felt the warmth of his fingers as they brushed against her wrist. It wasn't a performance touch. There were no cameras here. There were no spies. She heard the clock on the wall ticking, but for the first time, she wasn't counting down to revenge. She was just listening to the moment. "Why are you doing this, Nikolai?" she heard herself ask. Her voice was so quiet it was almost a sigh. "I heard the rumors. I know you don't do anything for free." She heard Nikolai let out a short, dry breath, not a laugh, but a sound of surprise. He stepped even closer, until she could hear the steady, calm rhythm of his chest rising and falling. "I heard a girl laughing 10 years ago," he whispered. Tara froze. She heard the words, but they didn't make sense. "It was at your father's garden party. You were hiding behind a rosebush because you didn't want to dance with the boy your mother had picked for you." I heard that laugh, and I thought it was the most honest sound in a world full of lies. Tara felt her eyes widen. She heard the kettle reach a whistling scream, but she didn't move to stop it. She heard Nikolai's voice continue, low and raw. "I've spent 10 years hearing people lie to me, Tara," he said. "I heard Elena lie every morning at breakfast. I heard Mark lie every time we shook hands. But when I heard you call me that night in the rain, I heard that same girl from the garden. And I decided I didn't want that laugh to go quiet again." He reached out and turned off the kettle. The sudden silence was deafening. Tara heard the blood rushing in her ears. She heard the sound of her own heart answering him, a fast, rhythmic thud-thud that she couldn't hide. "We were supposed to be pretending," she whispered. "I thought that, too," she heard Nikolai say. He leaned down, and she heard the sound of his stubble grazing her cheek as he spoke into her ear. "But I think we are both very bad at following the script." For a long minute, they just stood there. Tara heard the house settle. She heard the birds outside. She realized that she wasn't just falling for a partner in a crime, she was falling for the only person who had ever truly listened to her. The moment was broken by a loud, sharp crash asterisk from the west wing. It was the sound of a vase breaking, a violent, angry sound. Nikolai said with cold voice, "Elena is awake. She hears the sound of her world shrinking, and she doesn't like it." He stepped away, and Tara felt the sudden chill of the kitchen air. She heard the rustle of his clothes as he straightened his posture. "Get ready for the gala," he told her. "Tonight, we make sure they are finished." As Nikolai walked out, Tara heard the silence return. But it wasn't a lonely silence anymore. She heard the echo of his words about the garden. She heard the promise in his voice. And as she reached for her coffee cup, she heard the sound of a woman who was no longer just a ghost. She was a woman who was being seen, and loved, for the first time. The night of the gala finally arrived. The city air was sharp and smelled of rain and expensive gasoline. Tara sat in the back of Nikolai's sedan, her ears ringing with the silence between them. She heard the soft shush of her black gown against the leather seat. It was a heavy, expensive sound. She heard Nikolai's hand move. He didn't touch her, but she heard the rustle of his silk shirt as he leaned closer. "I hear the crowd through the windows," he said. His voice was a low, dark vibration. "They are waiting for a scandal. They are waiting to hear a woman cry or a man shout. Do you know what we are going to give them?" "Silence," Tara whispered. She heard her own voice, steady and cold. "No," Nikolai responded. She heard a small, sharp click as he opened a silver box and pulled out a necklace of black diamonds. "We are going to give them the sound of a landslide." As they pulled up to the red carpet, the noise was like a physical wall. Tara heard the rhythmic music from inside the hall. She heard the high-pitched zip of camera flashes. She heard the reporters screaming questions, their voices blending into a loud, messy roar. The car door opened with a heavy clunk. Nikolai stepped out first. Tara heard the crowd go quiet for a split second, a gap in the noise. Then, she heard the sound of 100 people whispering at once. It sounded like the wind through dead leaves. Nikolai reached back for her hand. Tara heard the snap of his cufflink as he adjusted his sleeve. She stepped out, and the light hit her. She heard the cameras start again, a frantic click-click that sounded like rain on a tin roof. They walked into the ballroom. The floor was polished marble, and every step Tara took made a sharp clack. She heard the orchestra playing a song that felt too fast and too bright. And then, she heard the sound she had been dreading. Tara! Stop! It was Mark. She heard his footsteps. They were heavy and uneven. He was running toward them. Behind him, she heard the light, frantic tap-tap of Elena's heels. Mark reached them and grabbed Tara's shoulder. She heard the sound of her silk dress straining under his grip. Nikolai moved so fast Tara didn't see it, she only heard the air whistle. Crack. It was the sound of Nikolai's hand hitting Mark's arm, knocking it away. It wasn't a loud sound, but in the sudden silence of the ballroom, it felt like a thunderclap. I heard a man forget his manners, she heard Nikolai say. His voice was so quiet it made people lean in to hear. I hope I didn't hear him touch something that doesn't belong to him. Tara looked at Mark. She heard his ragged breathing. He looked like a man who had been awake for 3 days. Behind him, Elena stood frozen. Tara heard the soft clink of Elena's wine glass shaking in her hand. You're ruining me, Mark stuttered. His voice was a broken, high-pitched sound. Everyone is talking. I heard the bank closed my accounts an hour ago. Tell them, Tara. Tell them to open my account. Tara looked at the crowd. She heard the silence of the hundreds of people watching them. She heard the way the orchestra had stopped playing, leaving only the sound of a single violin fading out. I heard you on the phone, Mark, Tara said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried to the back of the room. I heard you offer to trade me for a project. I heard you call me a necessary burden. A collective gasp went through the room, a soft, rushing sound like the tide coming in. She heard Elena try to speak. Tara, honey, you're confused. I heard you, too, Elena, Tara interrupted. She heard the sharp snap of Elena's glass finally breaking in her hand. Red wine splashed onto the white marble with a wet splat. I heard the laughter in my bedroom. I heard the sound of my best friend stealing my life. The ballroom stayed silent. The only sound was the wine dripping from Elena's fingers onto the floor. Nikolai stepped forward, his shadow falling over both of them. He told the room that the performance was over. He said that the only thing left to hear was the sound of the police arriving to discuss Mark's creative business files. As the security guards moved in, Tara heard Mark start to scream, a loud, ugly sound of a man who had lost everything. But she didn't look back. She heard Nikolai's voice in her ear, telling her it was time to leave. As they walked out of the gala and into the cool night air, Tara heard the city again. But it didn't sound scary anymore. She heard the engine of the car start with a powerful, smooth purr. She heard Nikolai's hand slide into hers, and this time, she heard the sound of her own heart beating, not with fear, but with a quiet, steady rhythm of a woman who had finally found her own voice. The transition from the chaotic roar of the gala to the interior of the sedan felt like being submerged in deep, dark water. The city lights blurred against the glass, streaks of neon amber and cold white that moved in a ghostly, rhythmic parade. The interior of the car was a sanctuary of hushed luxury, where the only sound was the faint, expensive whir of the climate control and the rhythmic sound of the tires over the bridge joints. Tara leaned her head against the cool leather of the headrest. The black diamonds around her neck felt heavier than before, a physical reminder of the landslide they had just triggered. The silence between her and Nikolai had changed again. It was no longer the silence of two predators stalking the same woods. It was a shared, resonant quiet, the kind that follows the final note of a long, difficult symphony. Their hands were joined on the whole journey. Nikolai's grip was steady, his thumb tracing a slow, rhythmic path over her knuckles. It was a grounded sound in a night of echoes. He didn't speak, sensing that the air was still too thick with the ghosts of the ballroom, the sound of Mark's desperate stutter and the wet splat of Elena's wine hitting the marble. As the car turned into the long, winding driveway of the Volkov mansion, the gravel crunched under the tires with a crisp finality. The iron gate swung shut with a heavy, metallic thud that vibrated through the frame of the car, signaling the end of the chase. The world outside those gates was now loud with the scandal they had unleashed, but inside the perimeter, the atmosphere was perfectly still. They entered the east wing, their footsteps echoing softly on the wood floors. The house felt different tonight. It didn't feel like a fortress or a hiding place, it felt like a home. Nikolai stopped in the grand hallway, the dim amber light of the sconces casting long, gentle shadows across his face. The removal of the jewelry was a ceremony of small, intimate sounds. The soft click of the necklace clasp, the slide of the silver against her skin, and the quiet rustle of his suit jacket as he draped it over a chair. Every movement was a word in a language they were still learning to speak, one that didn't require the noise of the city or the masks of the ballroom. A distant, muffled sound drifted through the vents, the far-off, rhythmic clack of a suitcase being closed in the west wing. It was the sound of Elena finally leaving, a hollow echo of a life built on hollow promises. It was the last ghost leaving the house. Nikolai turned to her, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the hall. He spoke not with words, but with a presence that filled the silence. He moved a hand to her cheek, his skin warm against the lingering chill of the night. The only sound left in the room was the steady, synchronized rhythm of their breathing. Tara realized then that she was no longer listening for the lies in the shadows or the whispers behind closed doors. She was listening to the sound of her own life beginning. The true silence of the mansion wasn't empty, it was a blank page, waiting for a new story to be written in the quiet, honest notes of a voice that was finally, undeniably her own. The morning sun arrived with a warmth that felt new, as if the light itself had been scrubbed clean of the past. Inside the east wing, the heavy, pressurized silence of the previous weeks had finally evaporated. Tara stood on the private balcony, the soft breeze catching the hem of her silk robe. She heard the distant, peaceful chime of a clock in the hallway, a steady sound that didn't feel like a countdown anymore. It felt like a heartbeat. The door behind her opened with a gentle, familiar click. She didn't have to turn around to know it was Nikolai. She heard the soft, steady rhythm of his footsteps on the stone floor. He wasn't wearing his suit, he moved with the ease of a man who had finally put down his armor. "The house feels different today," Nikolai said. His voice was a low, warm vibration that seemed to anchor her to the spot. "Elena is gone. I heard the last car leave the west wing an hour ago. It is just us now." Tara turned to face him. The morning light softened the hard lines of his face, making him look human, vulnerable, and real. She heard her own breath hitch a small, honest sound in the quiet of the morning. "I used to be afraid of the silence," Tara whispered. "I thought it was a place where things were hidden. But now, it feels like a place where I can finally breathe." Nikolai stepped closer. The air between them grew warm, filled with the scent of the rain-washed pines and the salt from the distant sea. He reached out, and she felt the heat of his hand as he gently cupped her face. The touch was not a performance. There were no cameras, no enemies, and no lies. "I told you once that I heard your laugh 10 years ago," he said, his voice dropping to a rough, honest whisper. "I've spent a long time listening for it. But last night, in the middle of the noise at the gala, I heard something else. I heard a woman who was ready to be seen. And I realized I don't want to just be the man who helped you find your voice. I want to be the man who listens to it for the rest of my life." He reached into his pocket, and Tara heard the faint, metallic clink of a ring. He held it out, a simple, elegant band that caught the sunlight. "I am a man of shadows, Tara," he said, his eyes locking onto hers with a depth she had never seen before. "But for you, I will be whatever you need. I love you. Not the girl from the garden, and not the woman from the gala. I love you, exactly as you are. Will you stay? Not as my partner in a game, but as my life?" The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound Tara had ever heard. It wasn't empty, it was full of the answer that had been growing in her heart since the night she first called him in the rain. "Yes," Tara said. Her voice was small but absolute. "I hear you, Nikolai. And I'm staying." She leaned into him, and she heard the steady, powerful thud-thud of his heart against her ear. Nikolai pulled her closer, his laughter a low, happy sound that filled the balcony. The true silence was finally complete. It was the end of the noise, the end of the fear, and the beginning of a story that they would write together, one honest word at a time.